A man asked the shelter for the most unloved dog, and here's who they gave him. A giant beast, scarred and feared, labeled dangerous, already marked for his final day. But when the man takes him home, the truth begins to surface. This dog isn't what the world thinks he is. Behind those scars lies a story of cruelty, betrayal, and something much darker hiding in the shadows. Suddenly, this simple act of kindness pulls the man into a battle he never expected, one that could cost him everything. Why was this dog really cast aside? And when the truth finally comes out, will saving him mean saving himself or losing it all? This space is built on something simple and enduring: the power of love, the truth and kindness, and the belief that quiet care can still change lives. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the shelter's parking lot as Clint Rourke stood beside his weathered pickup truck, adoption papers clutched in his calloused hand. The massive mastiff beside him shifted uneasily, muscles tense beneath his scarred coat. Diesel, that was the name on his file, though Clint wondered if anyone had ever actually called him that. "Easy there, big guy," Clint murmured, keeping his voice steady despite the flutter of uncertainty in his chest. The dog's large head turned toward him, amber eyes watchful but not aggressive. Up close, the scars on Diesel's face told stories. Clint wasn't sure he wanted to know. The shelter staff had practically tripped over themselves, trying to talk him out of this adoption. Their warnings still echoed in his mind. Aggressive tendencies. Failed 3 homes. Last chance before. They hadn't finished that sentence, but they hadn't needed to. Clint took a deep breath, remembering his brother Tommy's voice. Sometimes, the ones nobody wants are the ones who need somebody the most. Those words had always stuck with him, even more so now that Tommy was gone. The empty ache in his chest seemed to pulse with each heartbeat. "Well," he said to Diesel, "guess we better figure out how to get you in the truck." He opened the passenger door, watching as the mastiff assessed the situation. The dog's limp was pronounced as he shifted his weight, another detail that had been listed in his file under medical concerns. To Clint's surprise, Diesel didn't need much coaxing. After a careful inspection of the seat, he hoisted himself up with a grunt, settling into the worn fabric with unexpected grace for such a large animal. His ears remained alert, head turning to track Clint's movements as he walked around to the driver's side. The truck's door creaked as Clint climbed in, a familiar sound in the tense quiet. He glanced at his new companion, noting how Diesel filled most of the passenger seat, his presence both impressive and somehow vulnerable. The dog's breathing was measured, controlled, like he was trying very hard to be still. "Here's the deal," Clint said, starting the engine. "I'm not exactly sure what I'm doing here. Never had a dog before." He paused, watching Diesel's reaction to the engine's rumble. The mastiff's ears twitched, but he remained calm. "But I figure we both could use a fresh start." As they pulled out of the parking lot, Clint caught sight of the shelter staff watching through the window. Their expressions ranged from concern to outright dismay. He couldn't blame them. On paper, this was probably the worst possible match. A first-time dog owner taking on a mastiff with a history of aggression? It sounded like the beginning of a cautionary tale, but something in Diesel's file had caught his attention, beyond the bold red warnings and the list of failed placements. It was a small note, probably unintentional, that mentioned how the dog would position himself between shelter staff and any loud noises or sudden movements. Not attacking, protecting. The drive home was quiet, broken only by the occasional creak of the truck's suspension and the soft panting from the passenger seat. Clint lived on the outskirts of town, where his small house sat adjacent to his auto repair shop. As they turned onto the gravel drive, Diesel's head lifted, taking in the new surroundings. "Home sweet home," Clint said, parking in front of the modest ranch-style house. "Not much, but it's quiet out here." He turned off the engine, and for a moment, they both sat there, two uncertain souls on the brink of something neither fully understood. Looking at Diesel's scarred face in the fading daylight, Clint saw past the surface that had scared away so many others. He saw the careful way the dog held himself, the intelligence in those amber eyes, the way he watched and waited, not with aggression, but with caution born of hard experience. "You know," Clint said softly, "everyone's got their scars. Some are just more visible than others." He reached slowly into his jacket pocket, pulling out the simple leather collar he'd bought on his way to the shelter. It was sturdy but comfortable looking, a deep brown that seemed dignified enough for its new owner. "What do you say we give this a shot?" Diesel's eyes fixed on the collar, then moved to Clint's face. There was something in that look, a weight, an assessment, that made Clint feel like he was the one being interviewed for adoption. Then, ever so slightly, the massive dog lowered his head, allowing Clint to reach over with the collar. The leather was soft in Clint's work-roughened hands as he carefully fastened it around Diesel's neck. The dog lifted his head once it was secure, and for a brief moment, Clint could have sworn he sat a little straighter, as if the simple collar had restored something long lost. "Well," Clint said, managing a small smile, "guess we're in this together now." He opened his door, the familiar creak breaking the moment. As he walked around to help Diesel out if needed, he felt the weight of his decision settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just an adoption, it was a promise, a responsibility, maybe even a second chance for both of them. The Mastiff eased himself down from the truck, his limp more pronounced after the ride. He stood close to Clint's side, not touching, but near enough to feel the warmth radiating from his massive frame. Together, they faced the house, the setting sun painting the sky in shades of orange and purple behind them in that moment. With the day's last light fading and his unlikely new companion beside him, Clint felt something he hadn't experienced since Tommy's death. A sense of purpose, small but undeniable, like a pilot light flickering to life in a cold room. The drive home passed in tense silence, with Diesel perched stiffly on the passenger seat, his massive head turned toward the window. As Clint pulled into his driveway, the late afternoon sun illuminated the simple two-story house with its attached garage, where he ran his mechanic business. "Home sweet home," Clint said softly, cutting the engine. Diesel's ears twitched at his voice, but the dog remained still, watching. Getting him out of the truck proved easier than getting him in. The Mastiff waited for Clint to open the door, then carefully lowered himself to the ground, favoring his left hind leg inside. Clint watched as Diesel conducted a methodical inspection of the house. The dog moved with a deliberate caution that seemed at odds with the aggressive label in his file. There was intelligence in those amber eyes, and something else, a wariness that spoke of hard-learned lessons. Under the brighter indoor lighting, Clint began noticing details he'd missed at the shelter. Dark patches beneath Diesel's short fur caught his attention. At first he thought they were just shadows, but as he looked closer, his stomach tightened. Bruises, some fresh, others yellowing with age. And there, along the dog's flanks, small circular scars that could only be burn marks. "What did they do to you, boy?" Clint murmured, anger rising in his throat. Diesel turned at his voice, and their eyes met. The Mastiff held his gaze steadily. No hint of aggression in his bearing. Just pain, just wariness, just the quiet dignity of a survivor. A knock at the side door interrupted the moment. "Uncle Clint?" A familiar voice called out. "Mom said I could stop by after school." Sarah, his 12-year-old niece, stuck her head around the door before Clint could respond. She froze when she saw Diesel, her eyes widening at the Mastiff's imposing size. "Sarah, wait," Clint started, instinctively moving toward her, but Diesel was already turning to face the newcomer. The dog's muscles were tense, but he made no aggressive move. Instead, he lowered his head slightly, maintaining a respectful distance. Sarah, after her initial surprise, showed the fearlessness typical of many children. "You got a dog," she exclaimed, her voice pitched high with excitement. He's huge. Careful, Clint cautioned, but Diesel remained perfectly still as Sarah slowly approached. The Mastiff's tail gave a single tentative wag. What happened to his face? Sarah asked, noting the scars that crossed Diesel's broad features. Clint watched the interaction carefully, seeing how Diesel deliberately softened his posture, making himself less intimidating despite his size. This wasn't the behavior of an aggressive dog. This was something else entirely. The shelter said he was dangerous, Clint said slowly. But I'm starting to think they got that wrong. Sarah was now standing near Diesel, not quite touching him but close enough to see the marks on his coat. These look like Owies, she said, pointing to the bruises. Did somebody hurt him? The simple question hit Clint hard. Looking at the evidence before him, the burns, the bruises, the careful way Diesel held himself, a darker picture was emerging. This wasn't a dangerous dog who had earned his scars through aggression. This was a victim, someone's punching bag, probably being prepared for something illegal before being abandoned. The shelter's warnings took on a different meaning now. Had they really assessed Diesel fairly, or had they just seen his size, his scars, and made assumptions? The thought left a bitter taste in Clint's mouth. Some people are cruel, honey, he finally answered Sarah. But he's safe now. As if understanding the words, Diesel slowly moved closer to them. His tail wagged again, more confidently this time, and Sarah giggled as he gently sniffed her hand. He's not scary at all, she declared with the certainty only a child could. Muster, he's just sad. Clint watched as his niece carefully patted Diesel's broad head, the massive dog leaning ever so slightly into her touch. The sight stirred something protective in his chest. Someone had hurt this dog, had tried to turn him into something he wasn't, and then dumped him when they failed. The shelter had bought into that story, nearly condemning Diesel because of it. Looking at the gentle giant, accepting pets from his niece, Clint felt his initial uncertainty transform into determination. He'd trusted his instincts when he chose to adopt Diesel, and now those same instincts were telling him there was more to this story, more to the shelter's quick dismissal of this dog as dangerous, more to the injuries that spoke of systematic abuse rather than random accidents. The pieces didn't add up, and Clint had never been one to leave a broken machine without figuring out exactly what was wrong with it. Something was very wrong here, and Diesel's scars were just the visible part of it. The next morning dawned crisp and clear. Clint maintained his usual routine, opening the garage at 7:30 sharp, but now with Diesel padding quietly beside him. The Mastiff's presence drew curious glances from the neighbors, though none approached too closely. This is where I work, Clint explained to Diesel, watching as the dog carefully explored the garage space. Despite his size, Diesel moved with surprising grace between the tool benches and lifts, avoiding obstacles with practiced ease. When the first customer arrived to drop off their car, Diesel retreated to a corner, observing but not engaging. Throughout the morning, Clint kept an eye on his new companion while working on various vehicles. Diesel proved remarkably calm around the noise of power tools and the clang of metal. He didn't bark at customers or lunge at passing cars. Instead, he maintained a watchful presence, his behavior completely at odds with the aggressive label in his file. Around 11 o'clock, the sharp click of dress shoes on concrete cut through the ambient garage noise. A man in expensive charcoal suit approached, looking entirely out of place among the grease and tools. His polished appearance screamed authority, but there was something cold in his eyes that set Clint on edge. Mr. Rourke? The man's smile didn't reach his eyes. Ronald Keene, director of the county shelter. I hope you don't mind my dropping by unannounced. Clint wiped his hands on a shop rag, studying the shelter director. What can I do for you? It's about Diesel. Ronald's gaze swept the garage until he spotted the Mastiff in his corner. We've had some concerns about his placement. I'm here to conduct a mandatory reevaluation for aggressive tendencies. Reevaluation? Clint moved slightly, positioning himself between Ronald and Diesel. The adoption papers are finalized. He's my dog now. Ronald's smile tightened. Nevertheless, we maintain the right to assess potentially dangerous animals. It's a matter of public safety. He pulled out a clipboard. I'll need to take him back to the shelter for observation. No. Clint's voice was quiet but firm. Diesel's shown no aggression. He's been nothing but gentle, Mr. Rourke. Ronald's professional veneer cracked slightly, revealing something harder underneath. You don't understand the liability issues here. This dog has a documented history of aggressive behavior. We can't risk. What history? Clint interrupted. Those marks on him tell a different story. Looks more like someone hurt him than him hurting anyone. A flash of something, anger, worry, crossed Ronald's face before his mask of authority. Returned. Are you suggesting impropriety at my shelter, Mr. Rourke? I'm suggesting Diesel stays here. With me. Ronald stepped closer, lowering his voice. Listen carefully. That dog doesn't belong here. One way or another, he won't be staying in your care for long. We have protocols, procedures. The system works. How it works? His smile returned, sharp as a blade. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. From his corner, Diesel watched the exchange intently, his posture alert but controlled. When Ronald took another step toward Clint, the Mastiff rose silently to his feet, but made no aggressive move. I think we're done here, Clint said, meeting Ronald's gaze steadily. Unless you have a court order, Diesel's not going anywhere. Ronald's face hardened. This isn't over, Mr. Rourke, not by a long shot. He turned on his heel, that sharp click of dress shoes echoing through the garage again as he left. Clint watched him go, mind racing. The shelter director's visit confirmed his growing suspicions. Something wasn't right. The aggressive dog label, the rushed adoption, now this attempted seizure. It all pointed to something deeper, something wrong in the system itself. Diesel approached slowly, pressing his solid warmth against Clint's leg. Looking down at those intelligent eyes, Clint felt his resolve strengthen. Whatever was going on, whatever Ronald Keene was involved in, Clint wouldn't let them take Diesel. Not now, not ever. The rest of the day passed in a blur of oil changes and brake jobs, but Ronald's threats lingered like storm clouds on the horizon. What had started as a simple adoption had evolved into something far more complicated. Clint found himself watching the garage entrance more carefully, noting unfamiliar vehicles that drove by too slowly. The stakes had changed, and he knew he'd need to be prepared for whatever came next. The familiar veterinary clinic stood at the edge of town, its blue and white sign catching the morning light. Clint sat in his truck for a long moment, gathering his thoughts before heading inside with Diesel's medical folder tucked under his arm. The waiting room was quiet, with just an elderly woman stroking a sleeping cat in the corner. I need to speak with Jessa Calloway, Clint told the receptionist. It's about a shelter dog. A few minutes later, Jessa emerged from the back office. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her scrub showed signs of a busy morning. Recognition flickered across her face. Clint Rourke, right? You fixed my car last spring. That's right, got a minute? It's important. Jessa glanced at the clock, then nodded. I'm due for my break anyway. We can talk in the staff room. They settled into the small break room, where the smell of coffee hung in the air. Clint spread out the photos he'd taken of Diesel's injuries on the table between them. These are from a dog I just adopted from county names Diesel. They had him marked as aggressive, but I'm seeing something else entirely. Jessa's fingers trembled slightly as she picked up one of the photos, showing the healed burns under Diesel's fur. Her face paled. I remember him, she said softly. He came in about 3 months ago. She stopped abruptly, pressing her lips together. Before you quit? Clint prompted gently. Jessa's shoulders tensed. How did you know about that? Small town, people talk. Clint leaned forward, keeping his voice low and steady. Something wasn't right there, was it? The silence stretched between them. Jessa stared at the photos, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. I saw things that weren't right. But Ronald Keene, he has connections everywhere. The board, the city council. She swallowed hard. I convinced myself it wasn't my problem, that someone else would speak up. But nobody did, Clint finished. No, Jessa's voice cracked. And now I can't sleep some nights, thinking about the dogs I could have helped. She picked up another photo, studying the pattern of scarring. These aren't random injuries. This is consistent with... She hesitated again. With what? With dogs being prepped for fighting. Jessa's words came out in a rush. They deliberately hurt them, make them aggressive. Then they can either use them in fights or... She looked away. Or label them as dangerous and have them put down. No questions asked. Clint felt a cold anger settling in his chest. That's what they were planning for Diesel. Probably. Jessa finally met his eyes. You said Keene's already visited you. Be careful. He doesn't like loose ends. I need your help, Jessa. Clint spread out more photos. These injuries, the patterns. I need someone with expertise to document everything. Make it official. Jessa stood up suddenly, pacing the small room. You don't know what you're asking. If Keene finds out... I know exactly what I'm asking, Clint interrupted quietly. And I know it's not fair to put this on you. But Diesel isn't the only dog this is happening to, is he? Jessa stopped pacing, her back to him. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, her shoulders straightened, and she turned around. No, he's not. Will you help? She walked back to the table, picking up the photos with steadier hands this time. We'll need to do this right. Proper documentation, dated photographs, detailed medical notes. She pulled a notebook from her pocket and began writing rapidly. I can examine him after hours, keep everything confidential. But Clint? She looked up, her expression serious. This isn't just about saving one dog anymore. If we're going to do this, we need to be ready for what we might uncover. Clint nodded slowly. I know. But someone has to stand up. Might as well be us. A small smile touched Jessa's lips. Tomorrow evening, bring Diesel to my house. I'll have everything ready for a thorough exam. She tore out a page from her notebook and wrote down her address. And Clint, thank you for giving me a second chance to do the right thing. As Clint drove back to his garage, the weight of what they were undertaking settled over him. What had started as a simple desire to help one dog had grown into something much larger. But looking at the address clutched in his hand, he felt something else too, hope. In Jessa, he'd found not just an ally with the expertise they needed, but someone who understood the importance of what they were doing. The investigation was just beginning, and there would be risks. But as he thought of Diesel waiting for him, at the garage of all the other dogs still at the shelter's mercy, Clint knew they were doing the right thing. Sometimes he realized the biggest changes started with the smallest acts of courage, like a vet tech facing her guilt, or a mechanic choosing to trust his instincts about a dog nobody else wanted. The October night settled heavily over Clint's garage, the darkness broken only by a single security light, casting long shadows across the gravel parking lot. Inside, Clint was finishing up paperwork at his desk, while Diesel dozed nearby on his worn bed in the corner. The big dog's ears suddenly perked up, his head rising sharply. A metallic scraping sound came from the back door. Clint set down his pen, listening intently. The noise came again, more deliberate this time. Diesel rose silently to his feet, his muscles tense, but his demeanor calm and alert. The security light outside flickered, then went dark. Someone's cut the power, Clint muttered, reaching for his phone. Before he could dial, the back door burst open with a splintering crack. Two men in dark clothing rushed in. The taller one carried a heavy chain, while his stockier partner wielded what looked like a catchpole, the kind animal control officers used. Their faces were obscured by ski masks, but their intent was clear. "Get the dog," the tall one ordered, moving toward Clint. Diesel stood his ground between Clint and the intruders, a low growl rumbling in his chest. But he didn't charge or snap, just held his protective stance. "Back off," Clint warned, grabbing a wrench from his workbench. "You're not taking him." The tall man swung the chain, catching Clint across the chest. Pain exploded through his ribs as he stumbled backward into his tool cabinet. Tools clattered to the floor around him. Through watering eyes, he saw the shorter man trying to loop the catchpole around Diesel's neck. Diesel dodged the pole, still not attacking but staying between the men and Clint. His behavior was controlled, defensive rather than aggressive. Even now, proving everything the shelter had claimed about him wrong. Gasping through the pain in his chest, Clint lurched forward and swung the wrench. It connected with the tall man's shoulder, sending him staggering. The chain clattered to the concrete floor. "Get out!" Clint shouted, though each word sent daggers through his ribcage. "I've triggered the silent alarm. Police are already on their way." It was a bluff. His security system was basic at best, but he hoped they wouldn't call it. The shorter man made another grab for Diesel with the catchpole. This time, Clint brought the wrench down on the pole itself, knocking it from the man's hands. Diesel remained steadfast, his presence both protective and controlled. "This isn't worth it," the shorter man said, backing away. "Let's go." The tall one hesitated, clutching his injured shoulder. "Keen's not gonna like this." The name confirmation hit Clint as hard as the chain had. Ronald Keene had escalated from threats to violence, sending men to steal Diesel in the night. They weren't just up against paperwork anymore. This was something far more dangerous. The intruders fled into the darkness, leaving the splintered door swinging in the cool night air. Clint slumped against his workbench, each breath sending sharp pains through his chest. He was fairly certain he had at least one cracked rib. Diesel patted over, pressing his large head gently against Clint's leg. His dark eyes were filled with concern, and he whined softly. Even after the attack, there wasn't a hint of the aggression the shelter had labeled him with. He had defended without violence, protected without attacking. "Good boy," Clint managed, running a shaking hand over Diesel's broad head. "We're in real trouble now, aren't we?" The gravity of the situation settled over him like a physical weight. Ronald wasn't just trying to reclaim a dog. He was willing to hurt people to keep whatever secrets Diesel's existence threatened to expose. This wasn't about animal control forms or shelter policies anymore. This was about something that could get them both killed. Clint pulled out his phone, wincing at the movement. He needed to document everything while it was fresh. The splintered door, the abandoned catchpole, his injuries, it all needed to be recorded. They were evidence of how far Ronald would go to silence them. As he snapped photos with trembling fingers, Diesel stayed close, his solid presence both comforting and concerning. They had survived this attack, but Clint knew it was just the beginning. Ronald wouldn't stop here, and next time they might not be so lucky. Looking at Diesel's calm, steady demeanor in the face of violence, Clint felt a renewed sense of purpose through his pain. Whatever secrets lay behind Diesel's scars and the shelter's lies, they were worth exposing, even if the cost was becoming desperately clear. "We'll need help," he told Diesel, gently touching his throbbing ribs. "We can't do this alone anymore." The big dog leaned against him in silent agreement, both of them knowing that their quiet life had been irrevocably changed by the night's violence. The security light outside flickered back to life, illuminating the chaos left behind by the attack. Tools were scattered across the floor. The chain lay coiled like a serpent near the desk, and the catchpole served as stark evidence of what they'd narrowly escaped. Each piece told the story of how quickly their world had turned. Dangerous. Jessa's hands trembled as she spread the old files across Clint's workbench. The garage's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows on the yellowed papers. Before them, Diesel lay at their feet, his scarred face resting on his paws, as he watched them with worried eyes. "I shouldn't have these," Jessa whispered, her voice shaking. "But after what happened to you and Diesel last night, I knew I had to go back to the shelter after hours. I still had my old key, and something told me to check Ronald's private records." Clint leaned forward, wincing at the pain in his cracked rib from the previous night's attack. "What did you find?" Jessa pulled out a ledger filled with careful columns of numbers and coded entries. "Look at these markings. Egg for aggressive. But there's something else." She pointed to a series of dates and dollar amounts. These dogs weren't just being labeled unadoptable, they were being sold. Clint's throat tightened as he studied the patterns. "Sold to whom?" "Underground fighting rings," Jessa said, her voice barely audible. "Ronald's been doing this for years. He finds strong, healthy dogs, marks them as aggressive, then sells them to people who train them for fights. The ones who don't make it, like Diesel, they're dumped back at the shelter, broken and labeled as dangerous." Diesel whimpered softly, as if understanding. Clint reached down to scratch behind his ears, noting how the big dog leaned into his touch, seeking comfort. "Here's Diesel's original intake form," Jessa continued, pulling out another document. "He was brought in as a stray 8 months ago. Healthy, good temperament. But look at his evaluation just 2 weeks later." She laid the papers side by side. "Suddenly he's marked as aggressive, with notes about unprovoked attacks that never happened." Clint's hands clenched into fists. They were conditioning him for fights. "Yes," Jessa nodded, tears in her eyes. "But Diesel wouldn't fight. The scars, the burns, they were trying to make him aggressive, but he resisted. That's why they brought him back and marked him for euthanasia. He was useless to them." The truth hit Clint like a physical blow. Every mark on Diesel's body told a story of cruelty masked by bureaucracy. The shelter's legitimate work had become perfect cover for Ronald's secret operation. Dogs disappeared into a system designed to protect them, only to emerge broken or not at all. That's why Ronald's so desperate to get Diesel back, Clint realized. He's evidence, living proof of what they've been doing. Jessa pulled out more files, her hands steadier now. "It's not just Diesel. Look at these numbers. Dozens of dogs over the past 3 years. All large breeds, all following the same pattern. Healthy when they arrive, marked aggressive within weeks, then either disappeared or returned injured." Diesel stood up and pressed against Clint's leg, his warm weight steady and reassuring. Clint looked down at his dog, the survivor who had endured so much yet remained gentle, and felt his purpose crystallize. "We need to take this to the authorities," he said firmly. "It won't be easy," Jessa warned. "Ronald has connections. That's how he's gotten away with it for so long. And these records, I technically stole them. They might not even be admissible as evidence. Then we'll find another way," Clint insisted. "We'll document everything. Get testimonies from other shelter workers. There have to be others who suspected something wasn't right." Jessa nodded slowly. "There are. Most were too scared to speak up like me. But maybe now," she reached down to pet Diesel, who accepted her touch with his usual gentle patience. "Maybe seeing Diesel, knowing what he represents, will give them courage." Clint began sorting the documents into organized piles, his mechanic's mind breaking down the problem into manageable parts. "We need to build a case that can't be ignored. Every dog, every dollar, every person involved. It's not just about saving Diesel anymore, is it?" Jessa asked softly. "No," Clint replied, looking at the scattered evidence of years of systematic abuse. "It's about making sure this never happens to another dog. About exposing every person who profited from their pain." Diesel moved between them, his large head swiveling to look at each in turn, as if understanding the weight of the moment. His scar stood out starkly under the bright lights, no longer marks of shame but testimony to his resilience. "We'll need help," Jessa said, beginning to pack up the files. "Legal help, maybe media attention. Once Ronald realizes we know everything, he'll come at us harder than ever," Clint finished. "But this time we'll be ready. This time we have the truth." As they carefully stored the damning evidence, Clint felt the scope of his mission expanding. What had started as a simple desire to save one dog had unveiled a network of corruption and cruelty. The fight ahead would be difficult, perhaps dangerous, but looking at Diesel, living proof that gentleness could survive brutality, he knew it was worth any risk. "Underground fighting rings," Jessa said, her voice barely audible. "Ronald's been selling dogs he marks as aggressive to illegal dog fighting operations. The dates, the amounts, it all lines up with when certain dogs disappeared from the shelter." Clint's hands clenched into fists as he looked down at Diesel. The big mastiff gazed back with trusting eyes, his scarred face a testament to the cruelty he'd endured. That's why he wanted Diesel back so badly. He was supposed to be sold too. They spent the next few days gathering evidence. Jessa took detailed photos of Diesel's old injuries, documenting each scar and healed burn. Clint recorded testimony from other shelter workers who'd noticed suspicious patterns. The truth was finally coming together, piece by damning piece, but Ronald Keene wasn't about to let them expose his operation without a fight. It happened on a busy Saturday morning at the local farmer's market. Clint had brought Diesel along, as he often did now. The big dog stayed close to his side, calm and gentle as children asked to pet him. Everything was fine until a man Clint didn't recognize approached them. The stranger wore a shelter uniform and carried treats in his pocket. "Beautiful dog," he said, reaching out too quickly. Before Clint could stop him, the man grabbed Diesel's ear and twisted. Hard. Diesel yelped in pain and jerked away, his sudden movement causing the handler to stumble backward dramatically. "Help! Aggressive dog!" the man shouted, his voice carrying across the crowded marketplace. People turned to stare. Mothers pulled their children back. The handler continued his performance, pointing at Diesel with shaking fingers. "That's the dangerous mastiff from the shelter. He just tried to attack me." "No, that's not what happened," Clint protested, but his words were drowned out by growing murmurs of concern. He kept a firm grip on Diesel's leash, but the big dog wasn't lunging or barking. He was pressing against Clint's leg. Trembling, phones came out, recording the scene. Clint's heart sank as he realized how it must look to observers who hadn't seen the handler's cruel provocation. A massive, scarred dog seeming to lunge at an innocent shelter worker. Right on cue, Ronald Keene appeared with 2 police officers. His timing was too perfect to be coincidental. "This is exactly what we warned you about, Mr. Rourke," Ronald said, his voice dripping with false concern. "That dog is a public menace. Officers, we have documentation proving this animal's dangerous." "History." The police approached cautiously. "Sir, we're going to need you to surrender the dog." Clint felt like he couldn't breathe. Everything he and Jessa had uncovered, all their evidence about Ronald's scheme, none of it mattered in this moment. The public saw exactly what Ronald wanted them to see: a dangerous dog and a reckless owner. "Please," Clint said, his voice rough with emotion. He didn't do anything wrong. That handler hurt him on purpose. But the crowd had already made up their minds. Parents were complaining loudly about allowing such a vicious animal in a public space. The handler continued to act shaken, supported by other shelter staff who'd mysteriously appeared. It was a perfectly orchestrated show, and Clint was powerless to stop it. The officers moved closer. "Sir, don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." Diesel pressed harder against Clint's leg, looking up at him with desperate trust. This dog, who had survived so much cruelty, who had never shown an ounce of the aggression he was accused of, was about to be taken. A weight of face who knew what fate. Clint's hand tightened on the leash as Ronald smiled his smooth, victorious smile. In that moment, the shelter director's power seemed absolute. He had the law, the public, and a perfectly crafted narrative on his side. All Clint had was the truth, and right now, that didn't seem like enough. The officers reached for Diesel's leash. The big dog whimpered softly, and Clint felt his heart breaking. Everything they'd worked for, every bit of progress in proving Diesel's gentle nature, it was all crumbling in the face of Ronald's carefully staged deception. The crowd pressed closer, their phones still recording, waiting to see the dangerous dog led away. Clint stood frozen, trapped between his desperate need to protect Diesel and the weight of authority bearing down on him. Ronald's smug expression said it all. He had won, and he knew it. In that terrible moment, as hands reached for Diesel's leash, Clint felt the full force of the system they were fighting against. It wasn't just one corrupt shelter director. It was the power of public perception, the ease with which truth could be twisted, and the devastating impact of a well-crafted lie. The morning sun beat down on the farmer's market as Clint faced losing everything he'd fought so hard to protect. Diesel, his loyal companion who had never been the monster they claimed, trembled against his leg, both of them caught in Ronald's perfectly executed trap. Diesel yelped in pain and jerked away, his sudden movement causing nearby shoppers to gasp and back away. The handler immediately raised his hands and shouted, "Watch out, he's aggressive." People scattered, their weekend shopping forgotten in the panic. Mothers grabbed their children, pulling them away from what they perceived as danger. The handler continued his performance, pointing at Diesel and yelling about public safety. Clint's heart pounded as he saw animal control vehicles pulling up. This had been planned, a perfect setup to make Diesel look dangerous. "He's not aggressive," Clint shouted, but his words were lost in the chaos. Just then, through the crowd of frightened onlookers, came a small figure. Sarah, Clint's 8-year-old niece, had been shopping with her mother nearby. Before anyone could stop her, she walked straight toward Diesel. "Sarah, no!" Her mother called out in panic. But Sarah didn't hesitate. She remembered Diesel from her visits to Uncle Clint's garage. The big dog's tail began to wag as she approached, and his whole body relaxed. Despite the pain in his ear, despite the fear and chaos around him, Diesel sat down calmly. Sarah reached out and touched his scarred face. Diesel responded by gently nudging her hand with his nose, then giving it a soft lick. The crowd fell silent, watching in amazement as the supposedly dangerous dog showed nothing but gentleness to the little girl. "See?" Sarah announced to everyone, her clear voice carrying across the market square. "Diesel's not mean. He's just big and scared sometimes. Like when that man hurt his ear." The handler's face went pale. Several people in the crowd had seen him twist Diesel's ear, and now they were pointing it out to others. The narrative was shifting before everyone's eyes. Jessa pushed through the crowd, phone in hand. "I got it. All on video," she said breathlessly to Clint. The whole thing, including when he deliberately hurt Diesel. The animal control officers approached more slowly now, their urgent response tempered by the scene before them. One of them, a woman with graying hair, knelt down to observe Diesel more closely. Sarah was now sitting next to the big dog, her small arm draped over his broad shoulders. "Ma'am," Clint addressed the officer, "this dog has been framed. We have evidence that the shelter director, Ronald Keene, has been marking dogs as aggressive so he can sell them to fighting rings. Diesel was one of his victims, but we saved him before he could be sold." The officer looked from Clint to Diesel, then to Sarah still hugging the gentle giant. "I've worked animal control for 20 years, she said. "I know provoked behavior when I see it. This dog isn't aggressive. He's remarkably well controlled, especially given what just happened." Later that evening, Clint and Jessa sat in his kitchen, watching Sarah play with Diesel in the backyard through the window. The big dog was so careful with her, moving slowly, letting her lead their games. "Today changed everything," Jessa said, her voice firm with new determination. People saw the truth about Diesel, but more importantly, they saw how far Ronald will go to maintain his lies. Clint nodded, his jaw set. "We need to end this. Not just for Diesel, but for all the dogs that weren't as lucky." He pulled out a worn map of the industrial district. "You said the fighting happens in one of these warehouses?" Jessa pointed to a section on the edge of town. "Based on the paperwork I found, it has to be here. The electricity usage spikes on fight nights, and there's increased traffic in the area." "Then that's where we'll go," Clint said. "We need to catch them in the act, get undeniable proof of what Ronald's doing." They spent the next hour planning, drawing on Jessa's knowledge of the operation and Clint's determination to see justice done. The warehouse would be heavily guarded, but they identified possible entry points and the best times to strike. Looking out at Diesel playing with Sarah, Clint felt a renewed sense of purpose. The big dog's gentle nature with his niece hadn't just saved him from being taken. It had shown everyone present the truth about who he really was. Now it was time to save others like him. "We move tomorrow night," Clint decided, watching as Diesel carefully retrieved a ball Sarah had thrown, bringing it back with tail wagging. "Ronald's entire operation ends then." Jessa nodded, her expression matching his resolve. What had started as one man's mission to save a single dog had grown into something much larger. A fight to expose and end systematic cruelty. The truth about Diesel had given them hope, and now that hope would fuel their final push for justice. The night air hung heavy with tension. As Clint's truck rolled silently into the industrial district, headlights off. Beside him, Jessa checked her phone one last time, confirming the address. Diesel lay quietly in the back seat, his presence both comforting and concerning. They couldn't leave him alone, not with Ronald's men still looking for him. "There," Jessa whispered, pointing to a large metal building with dark windows. "Loading dock on the east side has a broken security camera. I noticed it when I worked there." They parked behind an abandoned delivery truck and moved cautiously toward the warehouse. The lock on the side door proved no match for Jessa's knowledge of the building's weaknesses. Inside, darkness pressed around them until Clint clicked on his flashlight, keeping it pointed low. The smell hit them first, the unmistakable odor of too many dogs kept in too small a space. As their eyes adjusted, rows of cages emerged from the shadows. Clint's hands shook as he began taking pictures with his phone. Dogs of all sizes, many bearing fresh wounds, crowded against their cage bars. Some showed signs of recent fights, torn ears, scarred faces, missing patches of fur. "Just like Diesel," Jessa breathed, her voice breaking. She documented everything with her own phone, marking each cage's location on her building layout. Deeper. In the warehouse they found training equipment, shock collars, fighting rings, and worse. Clint photographed it all, his jaw clenched tight. Behind him, Diesel moved silently, occasionally stopping to sniff at certain cages, as if recognizing old companions. A sudden light flooded the warehouse. "Well, well," Ronald's voice echoed through the building. "I wondered when you'd try something this stupid." Clint shoved his phone into Jessa's hands. "Get to the truck. Get these to the police." He turned to face Ronald and his approaching men, buying time as Jessa slipped away into the shadows. "You're done, Ronald," Clint called out. "We have everything we need." Ronald laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the metal walls. "You have nothing but trespassing charges against you. And after tonight, no one will find your body to press those charges." Clint ran, Diesel at his heels. They burst through the side door into the cold night air. His truck stood waiting, engine already running. Jessa had gotten there first. He jumped in, Diesel leaping into the back, and floored the accelerator. Headlights blazed behind them as Ronald's men gave chase. Clint's truck roared through empty streets, but the pursuing vehicles gained ground. A heavy impact shook the truck as one of Ronald's men rammed them from behind. "Hold on, boy," Clint muttered to Diesel as he fought to keep control. Another hit, this time from the side. The truck skidded, tires screaming against pavement. The world spun, metal crunched, and everything went black. Clint awoke to find his truck on its side in a ditch. Pain lanced through his ribs, and warm blood trickled down his face. Behind him, Diesel whimpered softly. Footsteps approached on gravel dot, using the last of his strength. Clint crawled into the back, positioning himself over Diesel. The dog tried to move, to protect him instead, but Clint held him still. "Stay down, boy. I've got you this time." Flashlight beams cut through the broken windows. Ronald's voice carried through the night. "End this. End it now." But before his men could act, police sirens split the darkness. Red and blue lights painted the scene as squad cars surrounded them. Jessa had come through. "Police! Hands where we can see them." Ronald tried to run but was quickly tackled. His men surrendered, dropping their weapons. Emergency responders helped Clint from the wreck, Diesel refusing to leave his side, even as paramedics tried to treat them separately. Jessa rushed over, tears streaming down her face. The police raided the warehouse. They found everything. The dogs, the fighting rings, all of it. "It's over, Clint. It's really over." Through his pain, Clint watched as Ronald was led away in handcuffs, his carefully built empire crumbling in a single night. Justice had finally caught up with him, brought down by the very creatures he had tried to destroy. The autumn sunlight streamed through the garage windows, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. 2 weeks had passed since Ronald's arrest, and the rhythm of life was finally settling into something peaceful. Clint worked beneath a car, the familiar sounds of tools clicking against metal filling the space. Diesel lay nearby on his new bed, watching every movement with contentment in his dark eyes. The big mastiff's transformation was remarkable. His scars remained, but the fearful tension had melted away. Now he wagged his tail at customers, accepted treats gently, and showed nothing but patience with the neighborhood children who sometimes visited. "Hey there," Jessa's voice called from the doorway. She entered carrying 2 cups of coffee, navigating around toolboxes with practiced ease. These visits had become regular, welcome breaks in Clint's day. "Perfect timing," Clint said, sliding out from under the car. He sat up, wiping his hands on a shop rag. Diesel trotted over to greet Jessa, receiving a scratch behind his ears. "The shelter board meeting went well," Jessa said, handing him a coffee. "They've implemented all the new policies. Every adoption application gets double-checked now, and there's a full veterinary inspection required before any euthanasia decision." Clint nodded, satisfaction warming his chest. Ronald's old network? Completely dismantled. The police found connections to fighting rings in 3 other counties. They're all being shut down. She settled beside him on the worn shop couch. The rescued dogs are doing better too. 12 of them have already been adopted by good families. Diesel rested his head on Clint's knee, and he absently stroked the dog's broad head. The mastiff's eyes closed in contentment, trust evident in every relaxed muscle. "You know," Jessa said softly, "when you first brought him in for me to examine, I never imagined we'd end up here." Clint smiled, remembering those early days of uncertainty. "Neither did I. Was just trying to save one dog." "You did more than that." Jessa's hand found his, their fingers intertwining naturally. "You showed everyone the truth, that labels like aggressive and unloved are just excuses for cruelty. Every dog deserves a chance." The warmth of her touch sparked something in Clint's heart, a feeling he hadn't expected to find in the midst of their fight for justice. Their shared battle had forged a connection deeper than friendship, built on trust and shared purpose. Looking around his garage, Clint realized how much had changed. The grief that had once consumed him, driving him to adopt society's most unwanted Dog had transformed into something meaningful. His brother's death had left him drowning in pain, but saving Diesel had given that pain purpose. "Remember what you told me?" Jessa asked. "The day you found those burns on his back?" "That I wouldn't let anyone hurt him again," Clint replied. "You kept that promise. And not just for him." She squeezed his hand. "You protected all of them." Diesel shifted, stretching out across both their feet like a living blanket. His scarred face might still look intimidating to strangers, but they knew the gentle soul beneath. "The prosecutor called," Clint said. "Ronald's taking a plea deal. 20 years, no possibility of early release. His associates too. Justice." Jessa whispered. "More than that," Clint replied. "It's a new beginning." The afternoon light painted everything golden, and in that moment, Clint felt the last weights of his past lifting. He had entered the shelter months ago as a broken man seeking company in his grief. Now he sat transformed, protector, champion, and no longer alone. Diesel sighed contentedly at their feet, his place in the world finally secure. Jessa's hand remained warm in Clint's, their shared victory building a bridge to something more. Together, they had fought darkness and won, bringing truth to light and hope to those who needed it most. In the quiet of the garage, surrounded by the tools of his trade and the love of those who had fought beside him, Clint found his peace at last. If something today spoke to the part of you that still believes in love, stay a while. Subscribe. I'll be here again tomorrow with another story worth feeling.